Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
And welcome back.
Yeah?
Yeah. First, I want to start today by congratulating you and Elena on a very successful launch of the Female Athletes Series podcast. I just had the pleasure to see how much work you guys are putting into it, and I love seeing all the feedback from the community.
Awesome. Well, it's been really fun to do, and I might have bitten off a little bit more than I can chew with producing and editing 2 podcasts per week while trying to do 800 other things, but it's so fulfilling that I'm probably going to keep doing it. So.
I do see the stress in your face.
That's why we do an audio-only podcast, so you can't see the bags that are under my eyes right now.
We're not going to do a YouTube one anytime soon, are we?
Maybe once I drop 6 or 8 commitments, we can go there.
Right, but it's a good point. It's scary, right, to do a podcast, but there is this power, like sort of rising up and speaking your truth and your reality. And we always say humans are these storytelling machines, and we empower ourselves and people in our community when we provide that space and that context for their stories. So your series is just really grounded in love, and from that comes positive change, which is really our main business.
Yeah, well, thank you. It means a lot, and we're excited to keep giving you a lot of episodes. Maybe we'll end up producing them beyond these 5. Maybe we'll come back to earth with a normal amount of podcasts per week. But thank you so much. Really appreciate all the listeners, and we're glad that you're back for the regular podcast too.
Okay, so guys, I always do. We move into our weekly coaching and training insights.
Yes.
Have you learned anything this week?
I've learned a couple things this week.
Okay, do tell.
And we didn't have coaching and training insights last week because we had a pretty extended interview with Greg Mueller, which was amazing, but we're kind of putting together all the insights we've picked up since then. So one that I'd like to talk about is I think a lot of my athletes recently have encountered just different life stressors or things going on that have necessitated me changing their workouts. So an example of that is we had put together a plan for the Dartmouth club team. They're headed to club collegiate nationals, and we made them a plan for this term. And then we got some feedback from students about a number of different things. A lot of students are sick. They have the freshman plague, or students have 4 midterms in 1 week, or they're just finding that they're not recovering super well from some of the beefier threshold sets that we'd done. And so we actually had to go back in and modify the plan, not just for this week, but for the rest of the term to align with where everybody's life stressors and general feeling was at. So it was good to do that because I think it just speaks to the point that if you're a person first, athlete second, these plans are going to evolve and change a lot over time. I've been doing this with other athletes too, who have family stuff going on, work stuff. Any type of stressor is going to impact how you can absorb training. So the big take home here is just make sure to loop your coach in. It's much better to say, hey, I'm really having a hard time nailing these key workouts. Do you have any suggestions for modifications? Then either not do anything or just try to push through when you're having a really hard time. So that's been a good lesson for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to bother my coaches. They put in all this work to make a plan. But I actually love it when people come back and say, X, Y, and Z is happening in my life and change the plan, which is great. I would rather be the person first than not, right?
Mm-hmm. And I would say too, it's more work for us to pick up the pieces when you've then just thrown in the towel and missed a week of workouts than to say, hey, we can feel like things are a little bit challenging right now and modify. And I would say also, we've talked about this in the past, but modifications don't preclude you from having a great race. We can still achieve that goal. There's many roads to Rome, as Jim always says. So always let us know if anything's going on.
And I think this segues well into my point that I've been thinking a lot this week for myself and for my athletes is that there is this sort of natural ebb and flow of energy through the year. And this time of year, it's wintertime now. It seems it's very common to have weeks where we're sort of crushing the training and we just feel amazing. But then there's other weeks, it just feels like this is a struggle. So that's okay, right? So like life, training has an ebb and flow. And as long as you're, consistent over a period of weeks and months, you'll end up being summer fit.
Yeah, many, many roads to Rome, ebb and flow. I've definitely been feeling that too. I've had a lot of life stressors recently, and I know that my training is not exactly where it was last year when at this time of year I maybe didn't have as many life stressors, and being able to say that's okay, my races are in July and I have different intentions this year, I think is somewhat powerful.
Yep. And it's sort of related to that is that being wintertime, we get these cloudy days. It seems like it's weeks and months before we ever see the sun. And last night I went to the Dartmouth club swim and we were just sort of chit-chatting beforehand and somebody mentioned, oh my God, the sun's been out this week. Hasn't it been amazing? And we all chimed in going, oh my God, it's been like 3 months since we've seen the sun. So if you're all feeling a little bit, out of balance because it is winter and it has been kind of cloudy, again, that's okay. But also, you can look ahead, if you have these weeks where it's super sunny, like for me this week, I've been getting out a lot, riding my bike a lot, looking ahead that next week's going to be cloudy and cold again. So I've been just sort of batching and doing a lot of training this week. So again, back to changing your plan is to look ahead, see the weather, and respond to what's going on around you.
Yeah, we recently took advantage of a beautiful 45-degree February day and rode outside for 3 hours. I normally wouldn't be doing a 3-hour outdoor ride in February, and that wasn't what was in my schedule for the day. But I think those days are so rare that sometimes you just have to do it for mental health.
I just want to emphasize that the plan is a map and not the territory. So when you feel high energy and you have some sun, feel free to get after it.
Would you also say the plan is an illusion of control?
It is. It generally is.
I love it. Okay, so those are some great insights. And I think that brings us to our main event of the day. So this episode, we are calling So You Want to Do an Ironman with a question mark at the end. And I'm going to do a quick disclaimer here. This episode is not actually just about Ironman. This is about taking on really big endurance events or goals. So this could be an ultra. This could be your training because you really want to do a fast presidential traverse. You could even be training for a marathon. This is just some type of event that's going to take up your time. And what we'd like to do is go through some of the principles that you should be thinking about before you decide to commit to that. Because you should really have a lot of reasons if you're going to sign up for something like this. And hopefully, if you're already working with us, you've thought through that. But this episode might reach some people who are on the fence about these big goals and can maybe help you clarify when is a good time to do them and what you should be thinking about, both practically and then more mentally as you approach this type of plan.
Ironman has this big cultural influence and it's marketed as the hardest one-day challenge. But as you say, it's really not. So again, yeah, this is about any big day. Use these principles to maybe you're just doing a 10K. You can still apply some of these principles or how are half Ironman. So we are going to go through this. If you are one of our athletes, this is sort of a preview of what's coming. And if you're not one of our athletes, you can use this as a template, again, to apply to an Ironman or any kind of big day.
Exactly. So I think we'll start with 4 key points that center on this question of you potentially wanting to do an Ironman and what you should be thinking about. So the first one that we'll give you in terms of advice is that you're going to want to develop and articulate the reasons why you want to race. So in general, training for any type of big event, we're going to use Ironman sort of as a running example here, but this type of training is very physically and very mentally challenging. So it requires an unusually high level of commitment over a really long period of time. We would say usually about 9 months at the minimum. And if you really want to race well, if you want to qualify for World Championships, this could be 2 to 5 years to build up that endurance if we even get there. And during that process, you're going to experience a lot of deep highs and deep, deep lows with training and racing. It can be lonely. It can be a lot of 6-hour rides sitting on the saddle. And when you're doing that, there aren't the same crowds cheering you on as you see in all those post-race photos or during race photos. Instead, you're just like struggling out of bed because it's time to go hit the pool for a 4,000-yard swim or do a 2-hour run. So just to do that, you want to start by articulating those reasons.
During my first Ironman build, I was actually training in Alaska. And it was springtime. It was really cold. I remember it being like sort of hour 3 of a long bike ride. And I hadn't really articulated why I wanted to do an Ironman. Actually, we all signed up because I think we were a little bit drunk one night. We all signed up for an Ironman. So that's not a good reason to sign up for an Ironman. But the point was that I hadn't really developed a why. I just was like, I'm just going along with the crowd. But it caught up to me, during the training. Again, when I was out there, it was cold. And I was lonely and I was like, well, why am I here? Mm-hmm. And we want to avoid that with our athletes. When you are cold, you are lonely and you're out there, we want you to be able to really reach back and say, this is why I did this.
Mm-hmm. So maybe for an example, I could talk a little bit about my why for racing Ironman Lake Placid this past year. And that was I believe it was my 5th Ironman overall. But the main reason why I wanted to do it was that I really felt like I could do better in the Ironman distance than I had ever done before for a couple of different reasons. So one of those was just fitness can be cumulative, and I had been building it over years and years. And I knew that I was approaching training in a much healthier way than I had in the past, both training and fueling, as I've talked about on a number of different podcasts here. So I really wanted to prove to myself, hey, if I absolutely nail this, I can be faster and better than I ever have been. And I think I also had felt a little bit unsatisfied by the last Ironman that I'd done. So we raced Ironman St. George in May of 2022. And that race was really hard for a lot of different reasons. It was just kind of like racing on Mars because the conditions were so different. And I was mentally a little bit shaky going in. We'd had some pretty scary experiences out there at a training camp that I just didn't feel totally locked in. And I got across the finish line, but I raced really conservatively because I was so nervous about the outcome. And I remember feeling a little bit frustrated and proud of myself for getting across the finish line, but thinking, did I give 90%? Did I give 95%? what would have happened if I'd given 100%. And so my biggest goal for Ironman Lake Placid was I want to cross the finish line and know that I gave it everything that I had and hopefully see some improvement. And then it felt super, super good when I did cross that finish line and hit those goals, knowing, hey, this was my fastest Ironman ever. I approached the training in the best way that I could, even though I had some ups and downs, as we've talked about. And I think the nice thing about that why is it didn't necessarily leave me wanting to do another Ironman right now. Like, it gave me this closure in the distance that I'm like, yeah, eventually I'll do another Ironman in my life. But right now I'm just so proud of that performance because it was aligned with those goals. And sure, it's a nice perk to get a whole bunch of kudos on Strava, but you want to think that even if you didn't have Strava and even if nobody knew about it, you still would be really happy with that. And that was certainly my experience.
I think it's one of the cool things about these big days and these big goals that you had is like there can be some sort of sense of closure. And sometimes I think, just in our everyday lives, we're just working a lot. And sometimes there's no real finish line at the end of a long day of work and nobody's going, good job, you made the finish line. So one of the cool things about athletics and something like an Ironman or a big day is you work for so long and then you come across the finish line and go, I really, like you just said, I gave it all, and there is a sense of closure. And I think that's a unique thing that athletics brings us.
Mm-hmm. And it's true that you might not actually hit that why. You could have a catastrophic mechanical or you could get COVID 3 days before the race and you might not get there. But I think at least grounding in that through the whole training process is something that's going to make it a little bit easier to get out of bed for that 2-hour run instead of just be like, well, I said I want a tattoo and I said I was going to do this. So yeah, the upshot here is sit down, do a little bit of deep thinking about your why for doing that race. And if you're not sure, your coach can be a great partner in that to just talk through like, hey, I want a big goal, but I'm not sure what that is. And I think we can sometimes help think through what else is going on in your life and what are your strengths and weaknesses and how can we choose a race that's best going to satisfy those goals.
Yeah, and as coaches, we've sat down, we've had a lot of conversations with people about why do you want to do an Ironman? And I think there's probably some examples of invalid whys, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so as you sort of dig deeper into people's motivations, maybe you'll think about like, oh, it'd be really cool. My friends will just think I'm awesome. Mm-hmm. Or there'll be some cool Strava titles. Or there's like this Instagram moment or sort of revenge racing. But there's all kinds of reasons to not do an Ironman. Mm-hmm. And so as a coach, we drill in with these with the athletes. But the point is that your why must be really deep and meaningful and honest.
Exactly. So next thing that we'll talk about in terms of one of these big principles before you decide to do a big race like this is that you're going to really want to get some good buy-in from your family and your friends. So when you're training for one of these races, it is so taxing on both your time and your resources. And it's going to create a lot of tension if you don't have that buy-in from that sort of immediate community that supports you. I think, Jim, you call it your everyday bucket. It's people that you like probably talk to every day. They're in your bucket and you talk to them every day and they're going to know a lot about what's going on in your life. And you are someone who gives them time. So all the time that you're putting into your 6-hour bike ride isn't necessarily going to be going back into that bucket. So it's unfortunate, but it can be sort of a selfish kind of journey to do something like an Ironman. And that's certainly not a reason to do it. I've done it a lot and I've acknowledged that that can be a sort of selfish endeavor. But you can't go into it unless you feel like you do have that support because we don't want this to be a big life stressor. And there is a time and a place for it with, I think, any friend group or family or whatever, but it is going to be a major sacrifice.
Right. Like everything else, it comes down to communication and expectations. And so we know that any big goal, it's going to take you away for, maybe 10 or even 20 weekend mornings during the training cycle. So you really do need to create this sustainable win-win bargain with your family and your friends. Like I say, you can't do it alone. We always say it takes a village to train a triathlete.
Yes. And that's when I am crossing that finish line. I'm always usually thinking the most about all the people that made a lot of sacrifices for me to get there, not the training that I put in, but all the times that I was gone at 6 a.m. on a Saturday until 2 p.m. because I had that big ride. So that's what fuels me.
And one thing we talk a lot about with our athletes, what does a successful project look like? If you're taking on a big event like an Ironman or an Ultra. And so, something that we view as being successful is that you end up at the end of this with better relationships with your family, your friends, and not worse relationships. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it is this really delicate and deliberate balancing act, for which you must always be sort of visually aware and communicative and really setting those expectations with your family, your friends, and your colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you want to, you can have a conversation with us and your family, and we can tell you exactly what it's going to look like. Okay, next big principle is a question you should ask yourself is, do you actually have the time to properly train for this race? So that time calculation also goes into these considerations about friends and family and all the people in your everyday bucket, but it's also your job and your other commitments and what you like to do for social life and what your travel schedule looks like. You should know that you're going to need between 10 and 20 hours a week, depending on your goals, to train for an Ironman. And those numbers might look a little bit different for an ultra or a half Ironman, but either way, this usually feels kind of like a part-time job is the way that I think about it if you want to do it correctly. So if you already have a full-time job and family commitments that make you feel like you have no additional time, it's going to really be hard to fit in those additional hours without some switches or moving things around. And then similarly, we have a lot of people who work full-time and still train for Ironman races, but that means they're stacking their stuff on the weekends. So on those weekends, especially during that specific prep phase, you're going to be doing 5 to 6 hour bike rides, a 4,000-yard swim, and you're going to log a lot of hours running. So it really turns onto this full-on lifestyle because you need to spend most of the time that you're not training then just recovering. I've definitely been in situations where I've made plans to, go out to a concert or something the night after or the night of a 6-hour ride and a race simulation. And you should be horizontal on the couch right now. You're totally dead. And so it's not even just that time that you spend training, but it turns into you needing to live this monk style lifestyle that we've talked about. And that can be a big strain unless you've definitely committed to doing that.
And we talk about this, 10 to 20 hours. That's actual training, but you think about all the time that it takes, for example, like going to the pool. Like everybody, most people don't have a pool at their house or in their building. So if you think about, maybe an average time is 30 minutes to your pool, and that could just be maybe 15 minutes getting to the pool and 15 minutes getting changed. So suddenly that's 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back. So that's 1 hour. So you have a 1 hour swim. So that's 1 hour, but it actually ends up being 2 hours of actual time. Same thing with biking or running. So a lot of times if you are training, say, just even 10 hours a week, it could be up to 5 to 10 hours additional of just logistics getting to and from your workout. And that's super important to take into account.
Mm-hmm. And something I'll layer on top of that too is your sleep demands are going to go up and your really quality fueling and food prep and nutrition plans are going to go up. You don't want to just skate by on picking up whatever random takeout or something. You really want to be nourishing yourself super well. And you want to be getting, often, like we see people perform the best with upwards of 9 hours a night. And that's really, really hard to do for most people, even who aren't training for an Ironman. But that's the best way to get the most out of yourself. So you got to do a little bit of finagling with your schedule, but I wouldn't start with just the 10 to 20 hours. I would say, do I have 30 hours to spend on this whole project per week? That's going to include some other things, but not include sleep. So that's a big scheduling consideration.
And the last one here is it's money, right? Do you have the budget for an Ironman? Ironmans are really expensive. I think the average cost of an Ironman now is about $750, but some races can be a ton more. And then you got to include housing and travel and gear expenses, and it could be $5,000, $10,000 easily, especially if you're buying a bike. Even things like nutrition and hydration products are really expensive.
Yeah, just as I was saying before, it's not only all the gels that you need and all the scratch and all the other things, it's even just a high quality nutrition. And the caloric intake is going to change for your family. Like you might be doing your grocery run and it's $300 every time you go because you need a whole lot more to sustain that 8 hours of training on a Saturday. So, we're all about not underfueling, but you also need to just afford the amount of food that takes. So keep that in mind and know that you're going to move through this stuff really quickly. It's really easy to use up like 8 gels over the course of a weekend or something, maybe more than that. And then you're restocking. And so make sure that you're not just budgeting for the race entry fee. That's barely any of the entire cost of an Ironman. And we definitely welcome tips from people on how to make this a little bit more affordable. And there are shortcuts that you can do, but things like nutrition and hydration are really non-negotiable. So, and a good bike, that's going to be important or else you won't get across the finish line. So you do want to have a lot of money sketched out for this.
So I think that's, those are the 4 key points. And I think we want to just sort of pause here for just a moment and say that none of these big events can happen unless you do square away the 4 that we just talked about, because it makes no sense to do this if you don't have the time or you don't have the money. So really we start, when we talk to our athletes, is really start with these 4. And then that's a decision point at that point. Is it yes, 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 or is there some no's in there? If there's some no's in there, then maybe we need to tack off and do something different.
And one thing I'll add to this too is we have a lot of athletes who don't have a ton of triathlon experience, but come to us wanting to do an Ironman. We can support that. We definitely have had athletes succeed at an Ironman, having not really raced a lot before. But my best advice would be see if you can sustain a good Olympic distance training plan. And if that goes really well and you feel like you're on top of everything you need to do, then try a half Ironman. And, sometimes we say that's useful because of the racing experience, but it's also the lifestyle experience. So if you are barely getting by on a half Ironman training plan, then you probably shouldn't do a full Ironman right now. Even if you could do it from a fitness perspective, it's really these life things that are so much more important. And we would say lifestyle and training, just like training and nutrition, they all go together. So let's make sure we're totally dialed on each element, and then we can kind of move forward with these bigger races.
But Katie, I saw Kona on TV. I want to be on TV like those people on NBC Sports, right? That get me pumped up.
So having been to Kona a couple of times, I will tell you it's kind of cool, but it's also just marketing. So don't let the marketing swindle you.
I always say if you want to go to Kona, you can just buy a ticket and go.
You can.
Any time of the year. Exactly. Let's go.
Yeah, could be nice.
So
okay.
You're right. So after those four, there are some top practical items that you will need. The first one that we talked about is, and it's very obvious, is a bike and a bike fit. But we bring that up because we have some athletes who maybe they have a cross bike and they say, I'm going to do an Ironman and I have my mountain bike. And we're like, well, yeah, you could, but you really do need to get a proper bike and a bike fit. And so you will literally spend hundreds of hours on the bike. And so it must fit properly. And if you are riding a road bike, you'll want to put some aero bars on there and practice an aero during the specific prep phase. So if you are riding a tri bike, you'll want to do that most of your last 12 weeks also riding in your tri bike. But again, the top thing is you need a bike.
And a lot of people do ask, like, should I get a tri bike? Is it okay to do a road bike? We've trained so many athletes who have done an Ironman on a road bike, but I would just say anecdotally, almost everyone either wishes that they got a tri bike by the time that they show up at the race, or they do an Ironman on a road bike and then they get a tri bike for their next season. So if you're on the fence, I do think this is a really worthwhile investment because it is free speed. These bikes are significantly faster than road bikes. And generally, Ironman courses are not so hilly that you're ever going to have an advantage on a road bike. There's, I think, very few courses I can think of, even things like Ironman Lake Placid, which has about 7,000 feet of climbing. You can still be an aero for almost all of that ride. So if you're on the fence about it and it's in your budget, definitely consider getting that tri bike. And don't wait until 2 weeks before. I had a couple athletes last year that were scrambling and seeing if they could find something on Craigslist because they heard that there was going to be a huge advantage of being on a tri bike. And that's a situation you do not want to be in. You want to have spent hundreds of hours on the bike you will ride on race day if you can.
And similarly, along that sort of bike theme is you want to try to probably get a smart trainer with Zwift or Ruby or some sort of online thing to make bike training just a ton easier.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah. You can do it on a dumb trainer, on a non-smart trainer. It's fine. But if you want to make things more seamless and get to take the thinking out of your training, then we would agree that Zwift is the way to go.
Our second top practical item is proper run shoes and run mechanics. Kind of like the bike, you will run hundreds of miles, so your shoes should fit. You need shoes that are appropriate for you and that distance, and you should ensure that your run mechanics are sound. And we talked a little bit about that with Neil in the PT episode as well.
And you should be switching out multiple pairs of shoes. That was something that Neil suggested for us. And you should keep in mind that one pair of shoes is not going to get you through an Ironman training cycle. At that type of mileage, I usually find that I need new shoes maybe every 2.5 to 3 months, which can get expensive. So I'll often kind of, if I see a sale, maybe I'll grab 2 pairs because I know that I'm going to use them. And I've had issues before with certain models just updating their shoe and it fitting differently or not being nice. So if you have the perfect shoe that you found, I would say buy 3 pairs right now. You can switch them out. You're going to last a lot longer. And then it won't be so jarring if you have to switch shoes or something 3 weeks before your race because you go to get new ones.
I've actually been surprised a number of times athletes have said, I'm starting to feel little niggles here and there. And then I'll sometimes remember to ask, well, how old are your running shoes? Mm-hmm. And people will say, I got them like 3 years ago. And you're like, no, go get a new pair of running shoes, please.
Yes. And one great feature is if you log your gear on Strava, you can set little reminders. So if you say, I am wearing my pink Barbie Hokas, everyone knows the pink Barbie Hokas. If I'm wearing those shoes, I'll just click it on my run and then it'll say, oh, we hit 250 miles on these shoes. I get a reminder and then I know. But for me personally, I just usually start to get shin splints. If I need new shoes, I switch the shoes and then it's totally fine. So little niggles like that, we would agree, start with those new shoes.
Number 3, you need to have regular access to a pool. And again, this seems obvious, but for some athletes we have, they don't live near a pool and they may live near a lake, but that's often impractical for most of the training. So again, you want to have access to a pool like 3 times a week. And, you'll want to be regularly swimming 3,000 yards. And then, as we get into this specific phase, you'll want to do at least one 4,000 swim per week. So again, you'll need to have easy access to a pool.
Yeah, a lot of brand new triathletes that I talk to think the main thing that they'll be doing for training is open water swimming because a triathlon is open water. But in reality, I don't think I did more than 10 open water swims before Ironman Lake Placid. And that's just because the water's not warm enough until usually late May, early June. And then the race happens within a month or two. So even if you almost never get in the open water, we can do a full prep in the pool. And that's where some incredible base fitness adaptations are going to happen. But as you're selecting a pool, you want to think about a lot of important factors. Not all pools are amazing. Sometimes pools are going to be really busy, or you find out that there's always a water aerobics class during the time that you want to do lap swim and only one lap lane is available. And the guy who wants to do floppy backstroke is in your lane. So make sure that you're trying to figure out a pool that's comfortable. And I've had issues with, people going to a pool that has way too much chlorine and it really irritates their skin or all those things. If you can figure that out before you start trying to go to the pool 3 or 4 times a week, that's the time to do it because it's a lot more stressful if you have to make the switch about halfway through your training plan.
What's wrong with floppy backstroke? I feel like I'm being called out.
I didn't want to say, Jim, but now that you mentioned it, yeah, floppy backstroke over here.
Next point is, we've talked about this in other episodes, is that you'll want to create or have access to some local body care network. So, for example, a PT who's familiar with endurance training is a good start. You will experience niggles and possible injuries. So be prepared to have a network in place so you can prevent and/or respond to what arises.
Exactly. Just like Neil said, it's really helpful to just be able to send an email or send a text, hey, this feels a little bit off, can I get in? Rather than having someone learn your body when you have an injury. It's really great if they know how it operates when you're healthy.
And the last practical item here is you just want to have some tri-kit or some sort of active gear that you can spend, 10 to 20 hours in, which is kind of hard, actually. So you must test this gear on all your race simulation weekends, which we'll talk about, and because you don't want to find out on race day that your kit is causing chafing.
Yes. Yeah. You should ideally develop an intimate relationship with chafing before you get to race day so you can figure out what to do about it. I have certainly been in the situation where I didn't know something was going to chafe until I did the race. And those have been the most uncomfortable showers of my entire life. So don't be like me.
So chamois cream, Bag Balm works really well.
Yeah, Bag Balm is Vermont's best chamois cream.
Yeah, exactly.
Tri-Slide is another one. We can link some of these resources in the show notes for chafing.
So those are some of our practical tips. And we'd like to now jump into sort of this training plan outline. And again, if you're one of our athletes, this gives you a preview of what's coming. And again, if you're not somebody who we coach, you can sort of use this template for self-coaching yourself. So the first one we have here is really a staple that we've developed, and actually probably stole it from other people. We call it big days or race simulation weekends. And we typically do these to start the specific preparation phase, which again is the last 12 weeks before your A race. And so on week 12 and week 8 and week 4 out from your A race, we typically do this big race simulation. And so what that can look like on, say, week 12 and week 8 is we might do, and again, this is for an Ironman, we would do a 4,000-yard swim on a Friday. And then on Saturday morning, we get up and do 100 miles or 5 to 6 hours on the bike. And then off the bike, we do about an hour run. And then on Sunday morning, we follow that up with a 90-minute easy run on Sunday.
So the purpose of these race simulations is ideally to practice exactly what's going to happen on race day, but not give you as huge of a stimulus of doing everything on the exact same day. So we're going to practice race hydration, we're going to practice nutrition, we're going to perform intervals at specific Ironman watts or run paces, and ideally we're going to use some terrain that's similar to your race course. So, you might not be able to actually go to that course, but we've actually had the very most success if we're able to travel to the race site. We've done this for Lake Placid before. And 4 weeks out, just do all the things on the course so that when you show up on race day, you're like, this is basically something I've already done before. Last time I did it over about a day and a half, and now I'm going to do it on a single day. We find that course experience can really just calm your race nerves. And one story I'll share on that is we went out to St. George, Utah when we both raced Utah and did that simulation. And it was logistically very challenging to do that. I mean, you had to fly from the Upper Valley, and I had to drive 10 hours there and back from California to make it out to St. George 4 weeks out. But we encountered the fact that we were going to be racing at 95 degrees at altitude with 40-mile-an-hour winds. And we learned that our race strategy has to be to go as easy as possible because your heart rate's going to be doing crazy things. And I felt like my racing approach would have been very different had I not done that race simulation. I would have targeted much higher power on the bike and much faster run paces. And I know for a fact that I would have blown up. So it was really, really valuable to say, okay, my expectations about this are not exactly the same as I thought they were. And therefore, I'm going to make some changes and then have a more successful race as a result.
Yeah, I would say that these 3 key weekends, really, they're the primary drivers of your race day readiness. And we learn a lot. People often ask, like, how fast am I going to go on race day? They may ask that maybe 6 months out from their race. And I say, hey, just wait until we get to the race day simulations. And then we'll really see how you react, where your fitness is, what you can actually sustain for 6 hours on the bike, which is a really long time to be on the bike. Again, like you said, it's very easy to be ambitious and think about, I'm going to hit these kind of watts. And then you get out there in hour 5, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really tired. And, how are you absorbing your nutrition? So these are key weekends. And then the nice part about these weekends too is then the week after is a recovery week, right? So you start to see how the last 12 weeks begin to develop. You have a race simulation weekend, you have a recovery week after that, and you may have a build week, and then pretty soon you're ready for another race simulation weekend.
Exactly. Yeah. So like we say, the specific prep phase, protect it. Don't have a lot of life stress if you can avoid it. Don't have a lot of travel. Your main goal is to be able to just do these race sims as best as you can. So then now I think we'll talk a little bit more about just what else is happening during that 4 to 8 weeks out. Really important specific prep time. I think in the past we've called this like the big push. It's this really big preparation getting in for the race. So some things to do. Number 1, you want to plan out and practice your race day hydration and nutrition. And this doesn't just have to happen during race sims. So we find that if you're doing a 2-hour ride, like make notes of what's working for you, what's not working for you, and then adapt it so that you're learning every single time. And we don't want any new products or surprises on race day. You want to be so dialed on your strategy that you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah, a key thing for hydration and for calories is to write it all down. Like, what did I do today? What did I eat today? And then put it in a spreadsheet and say, okay, this is how many carbs I'm doing per hour. This is how many calories I'm doing per hour. So that you can, again, if it worked, great, you can repeat it, go back to your notes. And if it doesn't work, we can go back and we can tweak it a little bit.
And we learned from Kate, our dietitian, that the gut is this trainable muscle, right? So the more that you practice your training in race day nutrition, the better, and the more that you can take in. You're not going to be able to start with the ability to absorb like 80 to 100 grams of carbs per hour. But if you start at 30 and then you get to 50 and then you get to 70 with practice, you'll get a lot better at it. And that's just going to go directly into a better performance. It's very straightforward.
And the next point, Katie, you just brought up with St. George is this heat and humidity index. And so we find that the 3 biggest factors of race day success are 1, fitness, 2, hydration and nutrition, and number 3 is heat and humidity. I think heat and humidity is one that people just don't spend enough time thinking about. So during your longer rides and your runs and your race sim weekends, begin to track what was the heat and humidity conditions like, and understand where you began to struggle or where you began to thrive, right? So I typically do something where I just take an example of, say you start a long ride and it's at 7 a.m. and it's 70 degrees and 80% humidity. And I just take those two and I just add them together and I say, okay, that's a heat index of 150. And this is the Jim Anderson heat index. I don't think this is any scientific value.
Meteorologists out here, they're going to be like, what the hell is this?
Exactly right. Yeah. So don't look this up. This is the Jim Anderson heat index value.
We're trademarking that.
Exactly. But as you progress through this ride, the day heats up, the humidity rises and falls. And so what you'll experience is that I think it's sort of this exponential thing. So if the temperature goes up to 80 and the humidity stays at 80, so you have a heat index now of like 160. And again, for me personally, that's a huge influence on me. So I know the difference between a value of 140 for me versus a value of 160 is huge. So the point is that begin to track heat and humidity and try to correlate that with what do you think is going to happen on race day.
I think it's interesting because heat and humidity is something that's not controllable, where nutrition, hydration, and fitness are both controllable, but you can control how you respond to it. So we have a lot of strategies that we'll talk to our athletes about leading up to a race, where if we know it's going to be 95 degrees at, say, Musselman in central New York, that could be a really hot race. Sometimes it's not hot, but we'll say, okay, here's your strategy. Every single aid station, you are dumping cold water in your head. Even if you don't feel hot, you've got to cool before you even get hot. And similarly on the bike, roll through that aid station, grab an icy bottle, down your back, down your chest. It's nice, just gives you this little boost of cooling. And we find that, again, you have to be proactive about it, but you can prepare for that. You can put ice in your hat, you can put ice in your kit. There's any number of things you can do. And if you could just keep your body cool, that's going to translate to a really, really strong performance in the heat, whereas you can have an awful performance in the heat if you don't do that.
You had a smart move at St. George, which I didn't know about. You said after the race, you said, oh yeah, I stopped at all the bike aid stations and took ice. I'm like, what? The bike aid stations have ice? What do you mean? She goes, yeah, I stopped and put ice everywhere. I was like, oh my God, I should have done that.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I hadn't planned on doing that, but I knew I was getting so hot that I said, okay, even if I literally get off the bike for 30 seconds at each aid station and put ice down my kit, put some ice in my bottles, I will have such a boost that I'm going to save minutes off that bike course. So I literally got off the bike every 6 miles in the second half of that bike course, but I stayed cool enough to be able to survive, which that was basically the bar of that day. We'll go into that race on another deep dive episode, but it was such carnage that you needed to just focus on survival. So for me, that was stopping at every bike aid station, unclipping, ice down the kit, and keep going.
Another point here is you want to research what gels and hydration they're going to be offering on race course. And again, this could be an Ironman, this could be an ultra, but you really want to find out, like, what am I going to encounter out there? And if you find out what they are offering, then maybe go ahead and buy some of those things. Like, for example, I know Morton is something that's offered a lot in a lot of race courses. So a lot of athletes are buying Morton and trying that out. And you should, right? Gatorade for me, I just can't do it. So I have to sort of cut the Gatorade. But again, you practice with what's on course and see how your gut reacts.
Exactly. And we have many athletes who love Gatorade. We have many athletes who can't handle Gatorade. So don't assume that because it's not the best for us that it's not going to work out for you.
The other thing you want to do is you want to plan and practice your race day bike watts and run paces. And again, this is where you can talk to your coach. And again, the race day simulations will really reveal to us what's practical bike watts and run pace.
And then one more thing I think I'll add here is you can be prepping kind of mentally as you get ready for this race. So something to do in those 4 to 8 weeks out is start identifying your race day controllables and uncontrollable variables. We've alluded to a lot of these variables so far. But I think if you start thinking about those uncontrollables, you can consider different potential solutions if things don't work out. And I find that that's a way where you can get really carried away or anxious about what's going to happen. But if you just run on the list of like, okay, if I get a bike mechanical, do I know how to change my flat tire? Like, I can learn that 8 weeks out if I don't know how. You should know how to do simple fixes like that. You know, if you, for example, have GI distress, what's your plan B for nutrition, all that type of stuff. So we can help you with that as your coaches, but it's nice to make that list and then come up with a solution for each potential uncontrollable variable. And then controllable ones, those are your control. So you can make some solutions on those too.
That's a very good point. The next point we have here is use social media cautiously. And what do I mean by that? Particularly every race seems to have like this Facebook race page. And I think those are both a curse and a blessing. I think from blessings is that you can learn a ton from the locals about the course and what the conditions may be like on that day. And that there's some good gear choices in there, maybe some best times to train on the courses. But those pages I notice are full of athletes who are very anxious and maybe they haven't trained as well as you. And I just feel like there's a lot of spraying of like anxiety on those pages. And especially with Ironman, they'll say, okay, I'm going out to the course, maybe 1 week before the Ironman. And they go, I'm doing my biggest race day sim on this week. And you're like, it's week 1 out from your race. You should have done this 4 weeks ago, right? So there's a lot of panic training going on some of these Facebook pages.
Exactly. Yeah. Facebook pages are not actually a place to post your training. If you're like us, let it come in on Strava if you want to. You don't have to, but your hay should be very much in the barn by the time you're within that 3-week window of race day. So don't gaslight yourself and be like, should I be out there riding backwards up the Keen descent in no, you definitely should not. You should be horizontal on the couch. That's what we want from you. So yeah, agree to use social media cautiously. Okay, last thing you can think about for that 4 to 8 weeks out, and now we're kind of transitioning into the 2 to 3 weeks out. If you are racing somewhere that's really hot, you can start to implement a bit of a sauna protocol. So the idea behind a sauna protocol is if you spend some time in a sauna, that can help your body just adjust to really hot temperatures. I don't think this is as important if you're training in the summer for months on end and then racing in the summer. But I've used this before leading up to Kona, for example, because it starts to get cool in the Upper Valley, or sometimes I'm training in California and it's blissfully 65 degrees every day. And then when you're going somewhere that has a heat index, a Jim Anderson heat index of like 1,000, you want to be acclimated. So you can spend some time in the sauna leading up to it. Usually it's, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that, a few days leading up to the race. And that can help your body adjust.
The other thing too, during that last 2 or 3 weeks is we all love a list. It's to start making your list of the race gear you need, the nutrition and the hydration. items that you'll need and just, start to order them. But write it all down. Make your list.
Exactly. And then our very last tip, this has been many tips, but as you're leading up to the race, you want to make sure that you're testing all your gear as you go. So this is almost like the 2 weeks out, the week out, make sure your bike is working well. Make sure that you've done a lot of swimming in your wetsuit, even if the water's been warm enough that you don't need it. You just want to make sure that every single piece of gear that you are using in the race feels really comfortable and familiar. So I've definitely had people who are like, yeah, I know I can swim in a wetsuit. And then they don't spend a lot of time in the wetsuit and they show up on race day and they're like, I forgot that this really tires out my shoulders and it chafes me on the back of my neck. And that's not a fun way to spend the rest of your Ironman. So practice, practice, practice. The biggest take home here is going into the Ironman should be pretty stress-free because you've done everything and it's so familiar that you don't even have to think about it.
Right. So in sum here, we've got 4 key points. There are to develop and articulate the reasons why you want to race. Number 2 is get buy-in from your family and friends. Number 3 is, do you have time to properly train for the race? And number 4 is, do you have budget for an Ironman? And again, we've covered, I think the time frame, 12 weeks out until about a couple weeks out from your Ironman. And there's probably, as we went through this, we realized there's a lot that happens 1 to 2 weeks out, the week of race day and race day itself. So I think that'll be a second part of our
Yes, we will circle back once our athletes are getting into that really, really crunch time, prep time. We'll talk about race week. But right now, we just want to give you some ideas on where you're going to go in the next several months and weeks and make sure that you're making the right decisions as you do that. All right. So with that, I think we're ready to move into our listener questions, which we have not done in a couple weeks now. I'll start. I got a listener question recently about how you can improve your sleep quality. So sometimes people have trouble falling asleep. Sometimes they have trouble with waking up really early. And there's a lot of things that can help you establish a really good sleep protocol. I think these are kind of run-of-the-mill tips, but first of all, try to shut down screen time at least an hour before you go to bed. So doing something that's calming or reading a book, getting away from bright lights is really good. We also find that if you're doing your workouts really late in the day, that can make it hard to fall asleep. So make sure that if you can, you're stacking a little bit of time. We understand that some people are working really busy full-time jobs that makes it really hard to do your workouts at other times of day. But again, doing threshold stuff at 8 p.m. is not going to be awesome for falling asleep. And then lastly, for many people, our starting point is that you want to be getting enough fuel, but sometimes it's helpful to have a little bit of a buffer to let your body digest before you go to bed. And then having like a light snack can help you get through that whole night. Something like Greek yogurt or a protein shake. I like to do that sometimes before bed because it helps me sleep through the whole night without waking up extra early.
And I think a resource that we can recommend is that there's a guy, Matthew Walker, which you've probably heard of on Huberman or other podcasts, and he wrote a book called Why We Sleep. So this is full of information on how to get better sleep, why we should get better sleep.
Exactly. So yeah, if sleep's not good, there's an upper bound on your quality of life. So trying to dial that in is a really big part of this. Another question we got recently was, when should you modify workouts if you're not feeling great, and when should you push through? So this goes back to sleep. An example would be if you had a really bad night, maybe you got 4 hours of sleep and you wake up and you see you've got a hard workout on the calendar. When should you push through and do that? And I think the first thing we'll say is feel free to loop us in. We can help you kind of think about your individualized factors, but it's really helpful to consider why you didn't sleep well. So was it that life stress is really, really high? If that's the reason, then yeah, I would say we should modify, maybe from something hard to something that's more movement focused, but is easier. So instead of doing a hill workout, we might just do a zone 2 run or something like that. Sometimes you might also just need to skip the workout entirely, because if doing the workout means you're only going to get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, let's say you're working really late and then to be able to work out the next day, you've got to sacrifice 2 hours of sleep. I would say, at least get 6 hours. That's the biggest thing for us. That's a very, very minimum. And we don't want you pushing through and sacrificing sleep because you're just not going to get the same stimulus from the workout. You're not going to recover as well. And those adaptations happen after the workout. So if you're totally exhausted, you're not going to be able to do that.
And one other thing you can do is you just talk about is consider swapping workouts around. Again, loop us in, talk to us. This happens to us all the time. People will reach out to us, almost daily basis and say, this is what's going on in my life. I'm like, great, let's just move things around. I always tell people that the workouts in Training Peaks are like they're Scrabble tiles. They're meant to be moved around.
Exactly. Yeah. Next question is, how do we think about downhill skiing in an endurance training context? So we have both had a ton of athletes in the last couple of weeks who've been like, hey, I'm going skiing on Saturday. Should I skip my workout? Should I replace my workout? Should I squeeze it in at the end of the day? And we want you to have fun. We understand that skiing is a big part of the winter, and there's a pretty high correlation between people that like to do endurance things and like to go skiing. So we don't want to say you can't go skiing. But I think a couple of principles to keep in mind are that this isn't really an off day because, you're outside, it's cold, you're moving around, but it also doesn't necessarily build base fitness. So downhill skiing, you're spending a lot of time on the lift. It depends how hard you're skiing. It's very different person to person. But in terms of that sustained mitochondrial development, we're not seeing the same thing in downhill skiing that we might see in running, cycling, swimming, or, for example, uphill skinning or Nordic skiing. Those are great aerobic activities. So we would say just do it sparingly in your season. I would probably sub it for like a lighter zone 2 day. If you have a quality workout that day, say you're supposed to do an FTP test, I wouldn't sub it for skiing. But if you're supposed to do a 4 mile zone 2 run, it's not going to make or break your training plan to sub that out. And I would say in general, just be precise about when you're going to include that in an Ironman build because those weekends are such crucial times for getting ready.
Would you substitute a strength workout for downhill skiing? Because it can be beefy.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the closest analog is you are even just like moving around in downhill skis is a big strength workout and getting your gear on or something. And since we are usually having people do 2 or sometimes 3 strength workouts per week, that would be totally fine to sub because I think you're working some of those same adaptations.
All right, so big surprise this week. We also got a number of swimming questions.
Swimming questions.
Again.
Sounds like the people want a swimming episode, but this will not come as a shock to any listeners that I don't really like swimming. So anyway.
Wait, the last time I swam was last June. So
what is the swimming question?
So the swimming question is, why do we use paddles in swimming? So we use paddles. This is to develop swim-specific strength. You can think about this as sort of a low cadence work that we do on the bike. And it's a great way to sort of get in more low heart rate, swim volume, and aerobic conditioning. So you often see at the end of the workouts, 4x200 with paddles and buoy. And that, again, that's just be really easy swimming, building strength, heart rate, just a way to get more fit.
I'll say also that using paddles is a great way to force your arms to be in the correct position. So it really forces that high elbow, that really good catch. We can talk through what all these things mean, but I found that swimming a ton of paddles and buoy has helped me have a better stroke when I don't have paddles because I'm building that strength and I'm also just locking in that technique.
Another question we had, again, it gets back to how many yards should I be swimming on my workouts? And so we wanted to sort of talk through about what is the structure of our swim workouts and how do you get the best use of your time when you do one of our swim workouts? So first of all, our swim workouts are meant as a guide. They're not always meant to be executed to the exact detail. And I'll expand on that is because, for example, in the warm-up, we suggest a warm-up in our swim workouts. But the yards will vary because, your warm-up should be specific to you. We recommend a warm-up between 500 and 1,000 yards. So already right there, your warm-up may be 500. And so we may do the math on our swim workouts on 1,000 warm-up, but maybe 500 is great for you. So, but with that warm-up, you want to include focus areas that activate your swimming body and your brain. And again, as I said, they're very individualized. So keep playing around with focus areas and find the ones that seem to give you the best results when you move into the main set.
When you hit that main set, we would just say do it to the very best of your ability. This is the meat of the workout. You want to do it with your best intention, but the focus isn't necessarily on swimming super fast. It's usually just on swimming really well. And we would say, you can thrash around and maybe go 1 second faster for your 50, but we'd rather you go 1 second slower and have perfect technique because that's what you need for half Ironman or Ironman swimming. And again, grounding in the intention of the workout. If you're supposed to do 10 100s and you forgot where you were and then you do 9 or you do 11, doesn't matter so much as the intention, which is some good quality swimming, good technique, a little bit of pressure sometimes, a little bit of easy other times, and then learning too how to have different gears. You want an easy gear, you want a medium gear, you want a fast gear, but all of this is just this broader intention of the workout. And I think we're answering this question just because we get so many people who are like, okay, it looks like, I don't know if it's 2,650 yards or 2,700 yards. And there are probably 100 math mistakes in all of our swim workouts. But the point is just get out there for the intention of the workout.
And the last part about that workout, we'll always put in a cool down because we're supposed to, because that's best practices. We'll usually put a 200-yard cool down in there. But to be honest, folks, who's doing a 200-yard cool down or who has the time? Some people do. I personally will do like a 50. I'll do a very easy 50, and then I'll get out of the pool, call it a win, and get on with my day.
And chat with a lifeguard for like 2 hours, maybe.
Hey, you have to have friends at the pool. They can do things for you.
You're the president of the pool friend club. Okay, so we are almost at the end of our time, and I think we're gonna have a long episode. But Jim's got a new segment for us. So Jim, tell us about this new segment.
I do. I have. So we always say we're in the business of change. So. So I thought we'd have just a little challenge every week. We call it the challenge of the week, just a little something, just to maybe a little behavioral habit that you can practice. So I'm introducing the challenge of the week into our podcast. Yeah. So my challenge this week is at least once a day, be bored. So if you're standing in line getting coffee, don't check your phone. And when you have a free moment, just relax and breathe and work on your mental durability.
I love that. I think all the time we are just so much in motion and thinking about moving on to the next thing, but taking some time to just be mindful and like taking your surroundings is really valuable. I definitely don't do it. So I am going to try working on that for my challenge of the week, and I'll report back next week to let you know if I chilled out.
And anybody else, please report back to us on how this is going.
Exactly.
So what is your challenge of the week?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here because this is your segment and my challenge. But I think my challenge of the week is mostly for me, and it might be for other people too. I think we all should probably work on being a little bit kinder to ourselves. I find that I do a lot of coaching. I think I do an okay job of being able to support my athletes or say like, hey, you've got a lot on your plate right now. It's okay if your workouts aren't going exactly right. But for me, I'm like, you suck when my workouts aren't going that right. So I'm going to work on being a little bit kinder to myself because I do have a lot of life stressors right now. And it doesn't help when you're beating yourself up about it. So let's all just be a little kinder to ourselves and the people around us.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, life is super hard. So let's be kind to each other and ourselves.
Totally. Well, after that sappy ending, can we do gear pick of the week?
We can. Let's get back to the regular programming here.
Good stuff. Okay, so my gear pick of the week is I am going to recommend, in honor of the couple of sunny days we've had this week, some sunglasses. So I really like the Julbo Edge sunglasses. And I have to say, Jim influenced me and our other good friends influenced me. Everyone had these cool glasses, but they're really awesome. I love them for running. I love them for cycling. I love them for Nordic skiing. The lenses transition a little bit, so they're okay to wear if it's cloudy out and you just want a little bit of protection on your eyes. And then they also work really well in the sun. So if you've seen any 0.5 selfies of me wearing sunglasses, those are the sunglasses, and we will link them in the show notes.
I love those sunglasses, and I have multiple pairs of them. And actually, somebody who has not very good eyesight, they actually make things clear. And I don't have prescription lenses, so I don't know. I think they're magic. So I think it's a great gear pick of the week. And my gear pick of the week is because we are getting out on our bikes now a little bit, is this what's called a Rovman FR160 bike light. And so that's a fancy way of saying it's just a small front bike light that's basically the size of the back of your Garmin, and it mounts on your Garmin mount, and then it has a mount itself on it so you can put your Garmin on top of it. So it just really stacks nicely. And it's not a very bright light in terms of like riding it in the dark, but it's got a very bright, flashy light for people. And sort of a hot take here is it's obviously really important to have a bright rear light, but I also think it's just as important to have a very bright front light.
Yep, I think that's great too. And I think especially this time of year where the days are getting longer, but it still is dark by like 5:30 at night. If you get one of those warm days, you're riding outside, you're a little ambitious, it's great to have a light that cars can spot you as they're coming up in that dusky light.
So anyway, check it out.
Love it. Okay, well, this was a great episode. If you want to do an Ironman, think about these principles. If you want to do anything else, think about them anyway. And if you're just here for the ride, thanks for being here because we love our podcast, we love our listeners, and we're going to keep it rolling.
Thanks, peeps.